Abandoned at the depot, she found a mountain home that needed her heart. By sunset, Nora Bell had no husband, no home, and no money left for the return train. She stood beside the freight platform in Mercy Creek with one worn carpetbag at her feet and dust on the hem of her brown traveling dress. The stage driver had already tossed down the last trunk. The horses stamped in the heat. Somewhere down the street, a blacksmith's hammer rang against iron, steady and cold, as if the whole town had decided to keep working while her life fell apart in public. The man who had sent for her stood 10 steps away. Amos Pike was not what his letters had promised. In those letters, he had written of loneliness, faith, a good house, and honest intentions. He had written that a man could not build a life alone. He had written that he wanted a wife with a gentle hand and a brave heart. Now he looked at Nora like she was a mistake, delivered to the wrong address. "I can't take you," he said. He said it loud enough for the porter to hear, loud enough for the woman carrying eggs in a basket to stop walking, loud enough for 2 cowhands near the water trough to turn their heads. Nora did not answer. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her bag. The leather was cracked, and one brass buckle hung loose. It had been her mother's bag once, back in Ohio, before fever took both her parents and left Nora with nothing but a name, a dress, and a habit of standing straight when the world tried to bend her. Amos cleared his throat. "You looked younger in the photograph." Nora's face did not change, but the words struck harder than he knew. The photograph had been taken 4 years ago, before factory, smoke stained her lungs in winter, before hunger sharpened her cheeks, before years of sewing for strangers stole the softness from her hands. "I sent the only photograph I owned," she said. Her voice was quiet. That made it worse somehow. A loud woman might have given the town a show. Nora gave them silence, and silence made people uncomfortable. Amos shifted his hat from one hand to the other. "I paid the agency. I paid part of your fare. I expected someone suited to my home. I crossed 300 miles because you asked me to." "I know that," he looked away, "but I changed my mind." A child near the mercantile whispered something and was hushed by his mother. The sound reached Nora anyway. Amos pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, the marriage agreement from the agency. He held it like it could excuse him, like ink on paper could make cruelty neat. "I am not a bad man," he said. Nora looked at him then, really looked, at his clean collar, at his polished boots, at the way he wanted the crowd to forgive him before she even had time to feel the wound. "No," she said softly. "A bad man might have had the courage to say this in private." Color rose up his neck. His mouth opened, then closed. He folded the paper, turned, and walked away toward the livery without offering her a coin, a meal, or one more word. The town watched him go. Then one by one, they stopped watching Nora. That was the part that hurt most, not the rejection. She had lived through rejection before. It was how quickly people decided her pain was none of their concern. The woman with the eggs crossed the street. The porter dragged a trunk into the shade. The cowhands went back to laughing, lower now, but still laughing. Nora bent and picked up her carpetbag. She did not know where she meant to go. There was a boarding house somewhere. There was always a boarding house if a woman had money, but Nora had only 2 coins in her glove and pride enough not to count them in public. At the far end of the street, a man had stopped beside the feed store. He was broad in the shoulders, with a dark hat pulled low and sawdust clinging to one sleeve. A coil of rope hung over his arm. His beard was rough but trimmed, and his face carried the tired look of someone who slept because he had to, not because rest came easy. His name was Elias Boone. Most folks in Mercy Creek knew him as the quiet widower from Wolf Pine Ridge. He came into town twice a month for flour, salt, nails, and medicine for his youngest child's chest. He paid his debts, spoke little, and never stayed longer than needed. He had not meant to step toward Nora. He had a wagon to load, a roof to patch before the next rain, 2 children waiting at a cabin where supper did not cook itself, and loneliness sat at the table like an extra guest. Still, he crossed the street. Nora saw his boots first. Scuffed brown leather, dust on the toes, one spur missing. She lifted her eyes. "Ma'am," he said. She waited. "I saw what happened." "That makes you one of many." A faint line moved near his mouth, not quite a smile. "I reckon so." She looked past him at the mountains behind the town. They rose blue and hard against the sky, like a wall she had no strength to climb. Elias shifted the rope on his arm. "I have 2 children up the ridge. Caleb is 9, Ruthie is 6. Their mother passed 3 winters ago." Nora's expression softened before she could stop it. "My place needs cooking," he continued. "Washing, some mending. I pay fair in room, board, and wages when I can. It would be proper. You'd have your own room, your own lock. No promises asked from you." Nora studied him carefully. Men could speak gently and still mean harm. She had learned that early. But Elias did not look at her like Amos had. He did not measure her face or her age or the worth of her body. He looked at her like a person standing in bad weather. "Why would you offer that to a stranger?" she asked. Elias glanced toward the livery where Amos had disappeared. Then he looked back at her. "Because I know what it is to be left with nowhere to put your grief." The words were plain, but they landed deep. For the first time since stepping down from the coach, Nora felt her throat tighten. She looked away quickly, toward the dusty street, toward the false safety of movement. "Can your children bear a stranger in the house?" she asked. "No," Elias said, "but they need one." That answer was too honest to dismiss. Nora looked down at her carpetbag. Everything she owned fit inside it. A Bible with her mother's name written in the front, 2 dresses, sewing needles wrapped in cloth, a ribbon she had never worn because it felt too pretty for a woman with no occasion. "I can cook," she said. "I can mend. I can work from before sunup till after dark." "I believe you." "You should not believe people too fast." "I don't." His eyes held hers, steady and sad. From the livery, Amos Pike came out leading a horse. He saw Nora speaking to Elias and stopped. For a moment, something like anger flashed across his face, as if the thing he had thrown away had no right to be picked up by another man. Nora saw it. So did Elias. The air between the 3 of them changed. Elias took Nora's carpetbag from her hand, not as if she was weak, but as if the choice had already been made and he meant to carry his share of it. "My wagon's this way," he said. Nora walked beside him through the watching town. She did not look back at Amos, not once. But when she climbed onto the wagon seat and saw the long mountain road ahead, a cold fear moved through her chest. She had escaped one uncertain future, only to ride toward another. And high above Mercy Creek, where the pines thickened and the shadows stretched early, 2 motherless children were about to hear that their father was bringing home the woman the town had rejected. The wagon climbed out of Mercy Creek, while the town still watched from behind windows and porch posts. Nora kept her hands folded in her lap, though the road shook hard enough to make her grip the bench more than once. The wheels found every stone. The old horse pulled steady, ears flicking at flies. Behind them, the town grew smaller until the church steeple vanished behind a bend and only the mountains remained. Elias did not speak for a long while. Nora was grateful for that. Some men filled silence because they feared what might rise inside it. Elias seemed to understand that silence had work of its own. It gave her room to breathe. It gave her room to gather the pieces of herself Amos Pike had scattered across the depot platform. The valley road became a pine road. The pine road became a narrow track cut into the mountain. The air cooled as they climbed. Dusk gave way to the smell of sap and damp earth. Far below, Mercy Creek lay in a golden haze, too far now to touch her, but not far enough to forget. Nora looked over once and found Elias watching the trail, both hands easy on the reins. How far? She asked. 2 hours if the mare keeps kind. She looks tired. She is. Elias glanced at the horse with quiet apology. So are most living things by this hour. Nora almost smiled, but the feeling passed before it reached her mouth. The trail bent near a stand of aspen trees. Their leaves shook in the wind like little green coins. A hawk circled high overhead. Somewhere in the brush, something small ran fast and hidden. Your children, Nora said. Do they know you went to town for a housekeeper? No. That answer made her look at him. Elias kept his eyes forward. I went for nails, flour, and cough syrup. And came back with me. I reckon that is how it happened. That may not comfort them. No, he said, it won't. She waited for him to add something kind, something hopeful, something a man might say to soften the truth. He did not. Nora looked at the road ahead. Then I should know more before I walk into their home. Elias nodded once. Caleb remembers his mother clear, too clear some days. He was 6 when she died, old enough to understand she was leaving, too young to know what to do with it. He does chores before I ask, keeps his boots lined up, does not laugh much. And Ruthie. At the little girl's name, Elias' face changed, only slightly but enough. Ruthie was 3. She remembers pieces, a song, the smell of lavender soap, her mother's hairbrush. Some days she says she remembers more, but I think she is afraid of forgetting, so she makes memory out of longing. Nora turned away. She knew that kind of longing. As a child, she had remembered her mother's hands for years after she could no longer remember her mother's voice. She had been ashamed of it, as if forgetting were a second death. What was your wife's name? She asked. Mary. He said the name carefully, not like a wound exactly, more like a lamp he still protected from wind. She was from around here. Born 2 valleys over, could ride better than most men, sang when she needed bread, hated cold coffee, loved yellow flowers. Nora listened, and something in her settled. A man who spoke of his dead wife that way was not looking to erase her. That mattered. The wagon jolted hard. Nora grabbed the sideboard. Elias slowed the mare. Last climb's rough, he said. Hold tight. The trail narrowed until pine branches brushed Nora's sleeve. The drop on one side fell steep through rocks and trees. The mountain seemed to lean close, listening. By the time the wagon crested the ridge, the sun had dipped low and turned the sky copper. Then Nora saw the cabin. It sat in a clearing with the forest gathered around it like a dark shawl. The walls were made of heavy logs. Smoke lifted from the stone chimney in a thin, uncertain line. A small barn stood behind it, patched in 3 different kinds of wood. There was a chicken run, a chopping block, a rain barrel, and a porch with 2 chairs, one empty and one broken. The place looked poor but not neglected, worn but not careless, like a heart that had kept beating after being hurt. A boy stood near the woodpile with an axe in his hand. He was small for 9, but his face held a grown man's caution. Dark hair fell over his brow. His shirt sleeves were rolled unevenly, and there was a smear of dirt along his jaw. He watched the wagon stop, watched Nora climb down, watched his father lift her carpet bag from the back. He did not say hello. Elias rested a hand on the horse's neck. Caleb. The boy's eyes never left Nora. Who is she? His voice was flat, but Nora heard the fear under it. This is Miss Nora Bell, Elias said. She'll be staying a while helping with the house. Caleb's fingers tightened around the axe handle. We don't need help. Elias did not scold him. We need supper. The boy looked toward the cabin. I can make beans. You can burn beans. Caleb's jaw tightened. Nora stepped forward slowly, leaving space between them. Burned beans can still fill a stomach. Caleb looked at her then, really looked, as if surprised she had not taken his father's side too quickly. But good beans are kinder, she added. For one small second, The boy seemed caught between offense and interest. Then he turned away and set the axe against the chopping block. The cabin door opened. A little girl stood in the doorway with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair was brown and loose, tangled at the ends. One hand held the doorframe. The other pressed a rag doll to her chest. Her cheeks were pale, and her eyes were wide enough to show every thought before she could hide it. "Pa," she called. Elias' whole body softened. "Ruthie, stay inside, air's turning cold." But Ruthie did not move. She looked at Nora with the open wonder of a child who had been lonely too long. "Is she visiting?" Nora answered before Elias could, "For a little while." Ruthie considered that. "Can you make biscuits?" "I can. Soft ones, when the flour allows it." Ruthie looked at her father. "We have flour." "Some," Elias said. The little girl nodded, as if this settled the matter. Then she coughed into the blanket, a small rough sound that made Elias turn sharply toward her. Nora heard it too, not a passing cough, a deep one, the kind that lived in a child's chest and waited for cold nights. She followed them inside. The cabin was warm but barely. A fire struggled in the hearth. The table was clean, though one leg was propped with a folded piece of wood. There were shelves with tin plates, a broom in the corner, a bucket near the door, and beside the window a wooden rocking chair with a shawl laid across its back. No one sat in that chair. Nora noticed the dust on the shawl. She noticed the way Elias did not look at it. She noticed Caleb did. The kitchen held flour, beans, potatoes, salt pork, and a small crock of sour milk. Not much, but enough to begin. "May I?" Nora asked. Elias looked confused until she nodded toward the stove. "Yes," he said, "of course." She removed her gloves, rolled her sleeves, and washed her hands at the basin. The water was cold enough to sting. Caleb stood near the door, watching like a guard. Ruthie crept closer, blanket dragging behind her. Nora measured flour into a bowl. Her hands moved from memory. Work had always steadied her when nothing else could. She cut lard with quick fingers, added sour milk, folded the dough gently. Ruthie leaned against the table. "Why did you come here?" Caleb shot his sister a warning look. Nora pressed the dough flat. She could have lied. A neat lie would have been easier for everyone. "Because I had nowhere else to go," she said. The room went quiet. Ruthie hugged her doll tighter. Caleb looked down at his boots. Elias stood by the door with his hat in his hands. His face was unreadable, but his thumb moved over the brim again and again. Nora set the biscuits in the pan. Outside, wind pushed against the cabin walls, and the lantern above the table trembled on its hook. Inside, no one spoke for a moment. Then Ruthie came around the table and stood beside Nora. "You can stand by me," the little girl whispered. "I know where the warm floorboard is." Nora looked down at her. It was such a small kindness. So small a grown person might have missed it, but Nora did not miss it. She had lived too long on crumbs of mercy to mistake one when it was offered. "Thank you," she said. Caleb turned away, but not before Nora saw his face change. Not trust. Not yet. But something had loosened. That night when the biscuits came out soft and golden, the four of them sat at the table like strangers pretending not to be hungry for more than food. Elias bowed his head. Caleb did the same. Ruthie peeked at Nora through her lashes. After grace, no one spoke much. They ate beans, potatoes, and biscuits with molasses spread thin. Caleb took one biscuit, then another. Ruthie broke hers into little pieces and fed a crumb to her doll when she thought no one was watching. Elias noticed, so did Nora. When supper ended, Ruthie's eyelids drooped. Caleb carried his plate to the basin without being asked. Elias stepped outside to check the mare. Nora stayed in the kitchen, wiping the table. Her fingers paused on a knife mark carved deep into the wood. Beside it, Smaller scratches formed uneven letters. M-A-M-A. She touched them once very lightly. Behind her, Caleb spoke from the doorway. That was her place. Nora turned. The boy's eyes were on the dusty rocking chair by the window. She sat there when she got too sick to stand. Pa, don't move it. Ruthie talks to it sometimes. Nora swallowed. I won't touch it. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. You better not, he said. Then he walked away into the dim hall. Nora stood alone in the lantern light, with flour on her sleeves and a dead woman's chair beside the window. For the first time all day, fear truly reached her. Not fear of Elias Boone. Not fear of work. Fear that this house did not merely need help. It needed healing, and healing was a dangerous thing to offer when your own heart was still bleeding. Morning came pale and cold over Wolf Pine Ridge. Nora woke before the sun cleared the trees. For a moment she did not know where she was. The room was small, with bare log walls and a narrow bed that creaked when she moved. Her carpetbag sat on the floor near the door. A square window looked out at black pine trunks and a strip of silver sky. Then she remembered. The depot, Amos Pike, the watching town, Elias Boone crossing the street, the mountain road, the children, the chair by the window with dust on the shawl. She sat up slowly and pressed one hand to her chest, as if she could hold herself together by force. The cabin was quiet but not peaceful. It had the kind of quiet that listened back. Nora, dressed in the gray morning light, pinned her hair and stepped into the kitchen. The fire had burned low. She knelt, fed it thin sticks, then larger wood, blowing gently until the flames caught. Soon the stove began to tick with heat. She found coffee beans in a tin, ground them by hand, and set water to boil. Her fingers moved with purpose, but her eyes kept drifting to that rocking chair. Mary's chair. The shawl lay over the back, faded blue. One corner slipped lower than the rest. Dust clung to it like memory. Nora had promised Caleb she would not touch it, and she meant to keep that promise. Some things did not belong to the living just because the dead were gone. She made cornmeal mush with a little molasses stirred in. There were 3 eggs, so she fried them and cut each one in half, though Elias' half was bigger because he had work waiting outside and guilt would not feed a man through morning chores. Elias came in first. His hair was damp from the pump. His shirt sleeves were rolled, and cold air followed him through the door. He stopped when he smelled coffee. You didn't have to rise this early, he said. I did if breakfast was to be ready. He looked at the table, then at her. You slept. Some. That room gets cold. I have slept in colder rooms. He seemed to want to ask more, but he did not. Nora was glad. Pity was a heavy blanket. It warmed nothing if thrown too fast. Caleb came next, boots in hand so he would not wake Ruthie. He froze when he saw Nora at the stove, as if he had hoped she might disappear in the night and was disappointed to find her real. Morning, she said. He nodded once. Your breakfast is on the table. I can serve myself. I know. That stopped him. He looked at her uncertain. I set it there because it was ready, she said, not because you cannot lift a spoon. Elias turned his face toward his coffee, but Nora saw the corner of his mouth move. Caleb sat down and ate without another word. After a few bites, his shoulders eased. He tried not to show it, but hunger had a way of making peace before pride agreed. Ruthie shuffled in last, dragging her blanket and doll. Her hair stood out in soft tangles. One cheek was marked with sleep. She looked at the table, then at Nora. You stayed, she said. Nora wiped her hands on her apron. I said I would. Sometimes people say things. Yes, Nora said, they do. Ruthie climbed onto the bench. Nora placed a bowl in front of her, then quietly added a little more molasses. Caleb noticed. He said nothing. They ate while dawn spread across the window. Outside, the mare snorted near the barn. A rooster called late and angry, as if morning had insulted him. Ruthie laughed softly at that, a tiny sound, but it filled the cabin in a way Nora felt before she understood it. Elias heard it too. His hand stopped halfway to his cup. He looked at Ruthie, then down at the table. After breakfast, Elias stood. "I'll be at the south fence till noon. Caleb, bring water, then check the kindling." I know you know." The boy's face eased at that. Elias took his hat from the peg, then paused near Nora. "If Ruthie's cough worsens, there's syrup on the top shelf." "I saw it." He nodded. "If you need me, send Caleb." "I will." He stepped outside, and the cabin felt different once he was gone. Less guarded in one way, more in another. Caleb carried the water buckets without being asked. Nora washed dishes. Ruthie stood beside her on a stool and dried spoons with great seriousness, though she left them wetter than before. "Do you know songs?" Ruthie asked. "A few." Mama knew songs. Nora's hand stilled over the basin. Caleb, coming through the door with an armload of wood, went stiff. Ruthie did not notice. She sang about a river and a red bird. Pa don't sing it right. Nora dried one plate, then set it carefully on the shelf. "Maybe your pa sings it the way he remembers." "That means wrong." This time Caleb spoke. "Ruthie." The little girl lowered her eyes. Nora turned, keeping her voice gentle. "I know one about a river, not a red bird, a blue one." Ruthie looked up. "Can you sing it?" Nora felt Caleb watching her. She felt Mary's chair behind her like a silent warning. "Not now," Nora said. "Maybe while we work." That seemed safe enough. Not a promise too large, not a trespass too bold. So later, while she swept dust from the corners and Ruthie lined potatoes in a row like soldiers, Nora hummed first, only humming, a soft tune from the home she had lost so long ago that sometimes it felt borrowed from someone else's childhood. Ruthie went still. Caleb came to the doorway. Nora kept sweeping. She did not make a show of it. She did not look toward the chair. She let the tune stay small, almost hidden under the brush of the broom. After a minute, Ruthie began humming with her. Wrong notes, tender ones. Caleb turned and left before anyone could see his face. By noon, the cabin looked brighter, not changed entirely. Nora would not have dared, but ashes were cleared, shelves wiped, the table scrubbed, and a cracked mug with no handle now held a few yellow flowers Ruthie had picked near the barn. When Elias returned, he stopped in the doorway. His eyes went first to the table, then the clean hearth, then the flowers. Last, they went to Mary's chair. Nora saw his chest rise. "I did not touch it," she said quietly. "I know." But his voice was rough. Ruthie ran to him, holding out a biscuit Nora had saved. Miss Nora sang a river song. Elias looked at Nora. Something passed across his face. Pain first, then gratitude, then fear, because gratitude could become need if a man was not careful. Caleb entered behind him and set down the water pail too hard. It was Mama's song. "No," Nora said, "it was." The boy looked ready to fight, though no one had argued. Nora walked to the counter, picked up a folded cloth and handed it to him. His torn shirt lay inside, the sleeve mended with small, even stitches. "You fixed it," he said. "It needed fixing." "I didn't ask." "No." "Why did you do it?" Nora held his gaze, because torn things should not be left torn when there is thread enough to mend them. Caleb looked down at the cloth, his mouth pressed tight. For a moment he seemed younger than 9, just a boy with too much grief packed behind his ribs. He took the shirt and walked outside. Ruthie watched him go. Elias did too. If this part of the story has touched your heart, stay with Nora a little longer, because the hardest wounds in that cabin were not the ones anyone could see. That evening, after supper, Caleb did not come to the table right away. Elias went to call him, but Nora touched his sleeve. "Let me." The touch surprised them both. She drew her hand back quickly and stepped outside. The air smelled of pine smoke and coming rain. Caleb sat on the chopping block near the woodpile, the mended shirt across his knees. He did not look up. "I don't want a new mother," he said. Nora stood a few feet away. "I'm not asking to be one." "Ruthie might. She is little. She forgets." His voice cracked on the word and he hated it. "She forgets Mama's voice, her face, the way she smelled. She'll forget everything if someone lets her." Nora looked toward the cabin window, where warm lantern light moved softly against the dark. "No," she said, "love does not work that way." Caleb's eyes lifted. Nora's voice stayed quiet. "When I was 8, I forgot the sound of my mother laughing. I cried for 2 nights because I thought it meant I had stopped loving her, but I had not. Forgetting a sound is not the same as losing a love." The boy stared at her. "What happened to your mother?" "She died." "And your father?" "Him too." His anger shifted. It did not vanish, but it changed shape. Nora took one slow breath. "I will not take your mother's place, Caleb. No one can, but I can cook breakfast. I can mend shirts. I can help Ruthie remember what she remembers and not shame her for what she forgets." Caleb looked down at the shirt again. His thumb moved over the new stitches. Then from the trees beyond the barn, a branch snapped. Nora turned. The sound came again, heavier this time, not wind, not a rabbit. Caleb stood fast, face pale. "Pa," he called, trying to sound brave and failing. "Something S in the trees." Inside the cabin, Elias' chair scraped back. Out beyond the lantern light, something moved between the pines, slow and large, and Nora realized the mountain was not done testing whether she belonged there. Elias reached the yard with his rifle in one hand and no coat on his shoulders. "Inside," he said. Caleb did not move. Nora saw the boy's fear fighting his pride. His hands were clenched at his sides, his boots planted in the dirt as if courage could be proven by standing still. "Caleb," Nora said, low and firm, "take Ruthie away from the window." That did what Elias' order had not. Caleb turned and ran for the cabin. Nora stayed where she was, beside the chopping block, her eyes fixed on the black line of pines beyond the barn. The lantern light from the window only reached so far. Past that, the woods were all shadow and movement. Another branch snapped. Elias stepped in front of Nora without looking at her. "Get behind me." "I am behind you." "Farther." "No." He glanced back then, sharp and startled. Nora had no weapon. Her hands were empty except for the mended shirt she had forgotten she still held. But she stood straight, chin lifted, pale in the lantern glow and steady as the cabin wall. Elias looked as if he wanted to argue. There was no time. A shape pushed through the trees near the chicken run. It was not a bear, not a wolf, it was a horse. For one breath, no one moved. The animal stumbled into the clearing, ribs showing beneath a mud-dark coat, reins dragging under its chin. A saddle hung crooked on its back. Its mane was tangled with burrs, and one stirrup slapped softly against its side as it walked. The horse took 3 more steps, then stopped near the rein barrel, trembling. Nora let out the breath she had been holding. Elias lowered the rifle, but not fully. "That's Judd Mercer's mare." Caleb appeared in the doorway behind them, Ruthie peering around his arm. "Who's Judd Mercer?" Nora asked. "Trapper, lives over the North Cut when he's not wandering, drinks more than he should, rides worse when he does." The mare dropped her head, foam clung to the bit, her sides heaved. Elias handed the rifle to Caleb. "Hold this pointed down, do not touch the trigger." Caleb's eyes widened, but he obeyed. Elias moved slowly toward the horse, one hand out, murmuring soft words. The mare shied, then stood, too tired to run. He caught the reins and laid a palm against her neck. "She's near spent," he said. "Saddle's slipped hard." Nora stepped closer. "Is there blood?" "No," Elias ran his hand along the strap. "But she's been running. Something scared her." The wind moved through the pines. The yard seemed suddenly larger, darker. "Where is the rider?" Nora asked. Elias did not answer right away. That silence answered for him. Ruthie coughed from the doorway. Nora turned. The little girl stood barefoot on the threshold, blanket slipping from one shoulder. "Ruthie inside," Nora said. "But the horse is hurt." "She is frightened. That is different. Go in where it's warm." Ruthie's lower lip trembled, but Caleb pulled her back gently, and this time she let him. Elias loosened the saddle and lifted it down. The mare flinched, then sighed as the weight came off her back. Nora took the saddle blanket from him and held it while he checked the animal over. "There are fresh scratches on the leather," he said, "not from brush." "Animals." Could be rock." He looked toward the north trail. "Judd may have been thrown." The sentence settled hard between them. Nora looked toward the cabin. Warm light. 2 children. A table not yet cleared. A little girl with a cough. Then she looked at Elias and saw that he was already making the choice no one wanted him to make. "You mean to go after him," she said. "If he's hurt out there, night will kill him before morning does." The old fear moved through her again, cold and quick. Not fear of the woods this time. Fear of being left in a house that had barely accepted her, with 2 children who might wake before dawn to learn their father had not come back. "You cannot go alone," she said. "I can move faster alone." "You can also fall alone." His jaw tightened. "I know these woods. Darkness knows them too." For a moment, the only sound was the mare breathing and the wind rubbing branches together. Elias looked toward the cabin. Caleb stood inside the door, still holding the rifle carefully pointed at the floor. Ruthie clung to his shirt, eyes wet with worry. "I have to try," Elias said. Nora heard more than duty in his voice. She heard Mary. She heard the old grave on the hill he never mentioned. She heard a man who had once been unable to save someone he loved and had never forgiven himself for it. So Nora did not beg him to stay. She went inside, took the lantern from the table, and lit a second one from its flame. Then she pulled her shawl tight, took a coil of rope from the peg, and came back out. Elias stared at her. "No." "Yes." "Nora, you brought me here because the house needed help. Tonight the help is not in the house. You don't know the trail. I know how to follow a man who does." Caleb stepped onto the porch. "I can come." "No," Elias and Nora said together. The boy flinched, then straightened. Nora walked up the porch steps and crouched before him, close enough that her voice would not carry to Ruthie. "Your job is harder. You must keep the fire alive, bolt the door, and keep your sister calm. Can you do that?" Caleb looked past her at his father. Elias nodded once. The boy swallowed. "Yes." Nora stood and handed him the mended shirt. "Then put this on. Night air is cold." Caleb took it. His fingers curled into the cloth as if it were more than a shirt. Elias moved to the porch and took the rifle from him. Then he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "If anyone comes, you do not open that door unless you hear my voice. What if it's you but something's wrong?" Elias paused. The question was too grown for a boy. "Then you listen to Miss Nora," he said. Caleb's eyes shifted to her. For the first time, he did not look angry that she had been given a place in the answer. Elias tied the mare near the barn with hay and water. Then he and Nora started toward the north cut. The lanterns made small circles of gold in the dark. Everything beyond them remained hidden. The trail was steep and narrow. Twice Nora's boot slipped on loose stone. Twice Elias' hand came back without a word, and twice she took it. His palm was rough and warm. He let go each time as soon as she had her footing, but the memory of the touch stayed with her. They found Judd Mercer, less than a mile from the cabin. He lay near a fallen pine, one leg twisted under him, hat gone, face pale beneath his beard. He groaned when Elias knelt beside him. "Mercer," Elias said, "can you hear me?" The man's eyes fluttered, hoarse through me. "Where are you hurt?" "Leg pried, maybe my fool head." Nora set her lantern down and opened her shawl. "We need to keep him warm." Elias looked at her, and this time he did not question her. They worked together, not neatly, not easily, but well. Elias cut branches for a drag. Nora tore the hem of her petticoat into strips and tied them firm around the boards to steady Judd's leg. Judd cursed once, then apologized when Nora looked at him. "Ma'am," he muttered, "didn't know there was a lady present." "There is," Nora said, "so try not to die rudely." A rough laugh broke out of Elias before he could stop it. The sound startled them both. It was small, brief, almost nothing. But in the cold, dark woods, with danger close and grief behind them, that laugh felt like the first crack of dawn. By the time they brought Judd back, Caleb had the fire high, water boiling, and Ruthie wrapped asleep in a quilt near the hearth. The door opened before Elias knocked, but Caleb had waited for his father's voice. Nora saw that and felt a quiet pride she had no right to claim. When Judd was settled on the floor with blankets beneath him, Elias rode down the lower trail to fetch help from the nearest ranch. Before he left, he looked at Nora standing by the fire, her dress torn, her hair loosened by wind, her hands stained with pine sap. "You did good tonight," he said. So did Caleb. The boy, sitting near Ruthie, looked down quickly. Elias' gaze moved from his son to Nora. Something unspoken passed through his face, something warmer than gratitude and more frightening because of it. Then he was gone into the night. Nora sat beside the hearth until the flames burned low. Ruthie slept. Judd snored. Caleb stayed awake across from her, wearing the mended shirt. After a long time, he spoke. "You didn't have to go with Pa." "No." "Why did you?" Nora looked at the fire. "Because some people should not be left alone in the dark." Caleb's thought about that. Then quietly he moved from the far side of the hearth to the chair closer to hers. Not beside her, not yet. But closer. By morning, Mercy Creek had found another reason to talk. Judd Mercer was carried down the mountain in the back of a neighbor's wagon with his leg splinted, his pride wounded, and his mouth working well enough to tell every man within hearing that Elias Boone's new housekeeper had more grit than half the men in the valley. Nora did not hear him say it. She was back at the cabin, washing pine sap from her hands in a basin of cold water, while Ruthie sat at the table watching her like she had returned from some grand battle in a storybook. "Did you see wolves?" Ruthie asked. "No." "A bear?" "No." "A ghost?" Nora wrung the cloth and glanced at the child. "If I had seen a ghost, I would have asked it to help carry Mr. Mercer." Ruthie giggled, then coughed into her sleeve. The sound stole Nora's smile. She crossed the room and laid the back of her hand against the little girl's forehead. No fever. Not yet. Still, the cough was deeper than Nora liked, and the morning air had teeth in it. She pulled Ruthie's blanket higher around her shoulders. "You stay near the fire today." "But I want to feed the mare." "Caleb can feed her." Caleb looked up from the woodbox. "I can." "You know where the hay is." "I know." "Then you can." He tried to hide it, but pride lifted his chin. Since the night before, something had changed in him. Not trust exactly. Trust was too large a word for a boy who guarded his heart like a locked drawer. But he had begun looking at Nora not as an intruder, but as someone whose words might be worth hearing. Elias returned close to noon. His coat was damp from mist, and his eyes were tired. He had ridden with Judd's wagon as far as the lower crossing, then turned back alone. When he came through the door, Ruthie climbed down from the bench and ran to him. He caught her with one arm and lifted her, though weariness bent his shoulders. "Easy little bird," he said, "your chest." "I didn't cough much." "You coughed twice while saying that." Ruthie frowned, betrayed by her own body. Elias kissed her hair and set her near the hearth. Then his eyes found Nora. There was mud on his boots, stubble on his jaw, and something uncertain in his face. "Dr. Hale says Judd will keep the leg," he said, "if he stays off it." "Will he?" "No." Nora nodded. "Then I hope Dr. Hale owns strong rope." Again that quick flicker near Elias' mouth, almost laughter, almost warmth. Caleb saw it too. He stared at his father as if he had witnessed snow falling in July. Elias removed his hat and hung it by the door. Judd told folks what happened. Nora went still. "What exactly did he tell them?" "That I went looking, that you came along, that you tied his splint better than I did." "I did." "You did," Elias paused. "He also told them Amos Pike was a fool." Caleb's eyes shot to Nora. Ruthie looked confused. "Who is Amos Pike?" she asked. Nora turned back to the stove. "A man who changed his mind." "About what?" "About being kind." The answer settled the room into silence. Elias took one step closer. "I did not know he would bring your name into town talk." "My name was already there before sundown yesterday." "That does not make it right." "No," Nora said, "but right and common are not always neighbors." Elias studied her as if those words had come from a place he could not see. Maybe they had. Nora had spent years learning the difference between what should be and what was. The world rarely apologized for that gap. After dinner, Elias went to mend the barn latch. Caleb followed him without being asked. Ruthie dozed by the fire with her doll tucked beneath her chin. Nora cleaned the kitchen, slower than usual. Tiredness had settled deep in her arms from the night's work, but beneath it was something stranger. The cabin no longer felt like a place she had entered by accident. That frightened her more than the mountain dark had. She was wiping the table when her hand brushed the carved letters again. M-A-M-A. She stopped. The marks were uneven, cut by a child's hand. Maybe Caleb's, maybe Ruthie's, maybe both. Nora looked toward the rocking chair where Mary's shawl still lay untouched. Dust gathered along the folded edge. One loose thread hung down like a question. Ruthie stirred in her sleep. "Mama," she whispered. Nora froze. The little girl did not wake. She only turned her face deeper into the blanket and breath through parted lips, still caught in whatever dream had called the word out of her. Nora's hand tightened around the cloth. She told herself the child had meant Mary. Of course she had meant Mary. Dreams belong to the past more often than the present. Still, the word moved through Nora like a door opening in a house she had never been allowed to enter. If you believe a lonely heart can find family in the most unexpected place, stay with this story, because Nora has not yet learned what that one whispered word will cost her. Near dusk, a rider came up the trail. Caleb saw him first from the barn and shouted for his father. Elias stepped into the yard, hammer in hand. Nora stood at the cabin door, Ruthie pressed against her skirt. The rider was not Amos Pike. He was older, with a gray mustache and a brown coat buttoned high against the cold. He introduced himself as Mr. Llewellyn Price from the matrimonial agency in St. Joseph. His horse looked fresh, his gloves expensive, and his smile too practiced to trust. "I am looking for Miss Nora Bell," he said. Nora stepped onto the porch. "You found her." Mr. Price's gaze traveled from her plain dress to Elias, then to the children. He seemed to understand the arrangement before anyone explained it, and his smile thinned. "I have come on behalf of Mr. Amos Pike." Elias' jaw hardened. He had his chance to speak. "This is a legal matter." "No," Nora said, "it is not." Mr. Price reached inside his coat and removed a folded document. "You signed an agreement, Miss Bell. Mr. Pike paid agency costs and travel expenses. If you refuse the match, restitution must be made." Nora felt the porch beneath her boots, solid and cold. The 2 coins in her glove seemed to burn against her memory. "I did not refuse him," she said. "He refused me in front of half of Mercy Creek." "That may be how you describe it." "That is how it happened," Elias said. Mr. Price looked at him. "And you are?" Before Elias could answer, Ruthie spoke from behind Nora. "He's my pa." The man's eyes dropped to the child, then returned to Nora with a hint of judgment. "I see." Nora took 1 step forward. Her hand trembled once, so she folded it into her apron. "No, sir," she said quietly, "you do not." Mr. Price held out the paper. "You have 7 days to repay the sum listed here, or return with me to fulfill the original arrangement." The yard went silent. Elias moved toward the porch. "She is not going anywhere with you." Mr. Price's smile vanished. "Then someone will pay." He set the document on the porch rail, turned his horse, and rode back down the trail without waiting for another word. Nora did not pick up the paper. Neither did Elias. Ruthie clung to her skirt. Caleb stood near the barn, face pale with anger. The mountains darkened around them, and for the first time since Nora had arrived, the danger did not come from the woods. It came from the world she had hoped to leave behind. The paper stayed on the porch rail until the wind lifted one corner and made it tap against the wood. No one moved for it. Nora stood with Ruthie's small hands twisted in her skirt and Caleb's angry breathing loud near the barn. Elias stared down the trail where Mr. Price had disappeared, his face set in a way that made him look carved from the mountain itself. At last, Nora stepped forward and picked up the document. The amount written at the bottom turned her stomach cold. $32.60. It might as well have been $300. To some people, such a sum was a small inconvenience. To Nora, it was months of labor. To Elias, with winter coming and 2 children to feed, it was not money lying idle in a drawer. Elias held out his hand. "Let me see." She folded the paper once. "No." His eyes narrowed. "Nora. It is my name on it. And my porch he laid it on. That does not make it your burden. It became my burden when he came here, threatening you in front of my children." The words were sharp, but not cruel. Still, Nora felt old habits rise inside her. A lifetime of owing no one because owing people gave them a handle to hold. She had seen what men did with handles. Amos had held a contract like it made her less than human. Mr. Price had held a number like it gave him power to drag her life backward. She would not let Elias hold either one. "I will find work in town," she said. "Sewing, washing, anything honest, I will repay it." Elias stepped closer. "And where will you stay while you do that?" "At the boarding house. With 2 coins. Nora's face warmed. He regretted the words as soon as they left him. She saw it. His mouth tightened and his gaze dropped to the porch boards. "I did not mean it that way," he said. "Yes, you did." "No, I meant you are not alone in this." She looked at him then, and the porch seemed to go quiet under them. The children had stopped moving. Even the pines seemed to listen. Nora's voice came low. "That is a dangerous thing to tell a woman who has been alone most of her life." Elias had no ready answer for that. Ruthie coughed. It broke the moment but not the feeling. Nora turned, took the child inside, and set water to warm on the stove. Caleb followed, bringing the cold air with him. Elias remained on the porch for a while, looking into the dark before he came in and closed the door. Supper was quieter than usual. Ruthie picked at her potatoes. Caleb pushed beans around his plate and kept glancing at Nora like he expected her to vanish between one breath and the next. Elias ate nothing at first. He sat with one hand around his cup, eyes on the table. Finally, Caleb put his fork down. He can't make her go, can he? Elias looked at Nora before answering. No man can own another person. Then why did he say she had to return? Because some men use fear when the law is not on their side. Caleb looked relieved, but only a little. What if he brings the sheriff? The sheriff knows the difference between debt and bondage. Nora hoped that was true. Hope had failed her before, but she wanted this one to hold. Ruthie slid off the bench and came to Nora's side. Without asking, she climbed halfway into Nora's lap, thin arms wrapping around her waist. "You won't go with the paper man," she whispered. Nora closed her eyes for one breath. Then she placed a hand on Ruthie's hair. "No," she said, "not with him." It was the strongest promise she could make. After the children were asleep, Elias found Nora at the table with the paper spread before her. A stub of pencil lay beside her hand. She had written small numbers in a line, trying to break the impossible amount into pieces a woman might carry. Elias lowered himself onto the bench across from her. "I have $6 in the flour tin," he said. Nora did not look up. "No." "I can sell the spare saddle." "No." "I have work promised at the Miller place after the first frost. I can ask for half early." "No." His patience thinned. "Are you going to say no until dawn?" "If you keep offering to pay another man's insult, yes." Elias leaned back, rubbing one hand over his beard. "You call it insult, Price calls it debt. Either way, he will come back." "Then let him come." "You are stubborn." "So are you." "That is not a plan." Nora looked at the paper. "I can sew. I saw a basket near the kitchen window." The room changed. Elias went still. Nora knew at once she had stepped too close to the chair, the shawl, the sleeping grief that lived in corners. "I did not touch it," she said quickly. "I only saw it." "It was Mary's." "I guessed." "She made shirts for half the ridge one winter when timber prices dropped, kept us fed." He looked toward the dark window, though there was nothing to see outside except his own reflection. "After she died, I put the basket up. Ruthie cried whenever she saw it open." Nora folded her hands. "Then leave it." Elias was silent for a long moment. "No," he said at last. "If it can help keep you safe, it should not sit gathering dust." He stood before she could stop him. The basket was on the upper shelf, pushed back beside a jar of buttons and a cracked blue cup. Elias reached for it, then paused. His hand hovered there, not touching. Nora saw his shoulders rise and fall with a breath that hurt. "You do not have to," she said. "Yes," he said, voice rough, "I do." He brought the basket down and set it on the table between them. Neither opened it at first. It was made of pale wood, worn smooth at the edges. A faded ribbon had been tied around one handle, yellow once, now almost white. Nora touched the lid with 2 fingers, then looked at Elias for permission. He nodded. Inside were spools of thread, needles tucked into cloth, scraps of calico, a thimble, small scissors, and beneath them all, a folded piece of paper. Elias saw it and frowned. "I don't know that." Nora lifted it carefully. The paper had yellowed at the creases. Elias' name was written on the outside in a woman's hand. He took it as if it might burn him. For several breaths he only stared, then he opened it. Nora turned her eyes away. Some words belonged first to the person they were written for. But Elias did not read long before his hand began to tremble. "What is it?" Nora asked softly. He swallowed Mary. The name came out broken. Nora stayed still. Elias read again, slower this time. His eyes moved over the page, and the hard lines around his mouth gave way to something raw. She wrote this near the end, he said. I never found it. What does it say? He sat down heavily. The paper shook once in his hand. She says she knows I will try to turn grief into duty. Says I will keep the children fed and warm but forget that they need laughter too. A painful breath left him. She says if kindness comes to our door after she is gone, I am not to turn it away just because it does not look like the life I lost. Nora felt the room blur. Elias looked up at her. In the quiet cabin, with Mary's sewing basket open between them and the unpaid debt lying beside it, something unseen shifted. It felt as if the dead woman whose chair no one touched had finally spoken, not to accuse, but to loosen the hold grief had kept on that house. Then Ruthie cried out from the back room. Not a small dream sound, not a cough. A frightened, breathless cry. Elias was on his feet first. Nora followed, her heart pounding hard. They found Ruthie sitting up in bed, face wet, one hand clutching her chest and the other reaching into the dark. I forgot her voice, she sobbed. Pa, I forgot Mama's voice. Ruthie's cry cut through the cabin like a blade through cloth. Elias reached the bed first and knelt beside it, taking her small shoulders in his hands. Little bird, breathe, look at me. But Ruthie could not settle. Her face was twisted with a grief too large for her small body. Her chest rose and fell fast, and each breath caught behind the cough that had troubled her for weeks. I forgot, she sobbed. I tried to hear her, Pa, I tried and I couldn't. I can't remember Mama singing. Elias went pale. There were pains a man could mend with splints, nails, rope, or steady hands. This was not one of them. He looked at his daughter as if she had reached into his chest and pulled out the one sorrow he had never known how to answer. Caleb stood in the doorway in his nightshirt, hair wild from sleep. His face had gone hard, but his eyes were shining. You didn't forget, he said. You're just tired. Ruthie shook her head fiercely. I did. I can't hear it anymore. Nora stood behind Elias, one hand pressed to the doorframe. She had known this terror. She had lived it. The first forgotten sound. The first faded face. The shame of losing pieces of the dead as if love were a lamp and memory the only oil. Elias pulled Ruthie close. It's all right. No, it isn't, Ruthie cried into his shirt. If I forget her, she'll be gone. The words broke something in the room. Caleb turned away fast, but not fast enough to hide the tear that slipped down his cheek. Elias closed his eyes. His arms tightened around his daughter, but he had no answer, no word strong enough, no fatherly lie that could make the fear untrue. Nora stepped forward. She sat on the edge of the bed, leaving space, not taking over. Ruthie, she said softly. The child looked at her through wet lashes. My mother died when I was little. For a long time I was afraid of the same thing. Ruthie sniffed. You forgot her too. I forgot some things. Her laugh first. Then the way she said my name when she was pleased with me. Later, I could not remember exactly how her hand felt on my hair. Ruthie's mouth trembled. Nora reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small white button she had found that morning near Mary's sewing basket. She had meant to place it back. Now she held it in her palm. But forgetting a sound did not mean I forgot my mother. It meant my heart was making room to carry her in a different way. Ruthie stared at the button. What way? Nora looked toward Elias. He watched her with a pain so open it made her voice nearly fail. In what she taught, in what she loved, in the kindness she gave, in the people who still speak her name. Caleb wiped his face with his sleeve, angry at the tear more than the sadness. Nora turned to him. Caleb, what did your mama love? He stiffened. Yellow flowers. Ruthie lifted her head a little. And Nora asked, Caleb swallowed. Cold mornings, she said, they made coffee taste better. Elias gave a broken laugh under his breath. She did say that. Ruthie blinked. She hated cold coffee. She hated drinking it cold, Elias said, but she liked the morning cold. Caleb took one step into the room. She kept peppermints in the blue jar. She thought Pa didn't know. I knew, Elias said. No, you didn't. I knew after you stole them and left the lid off. Ruthie's breathing slowed. Nora watched the change happen. Not healing, not yet, but a rope thrown across dark water. What else? She asked. Elias looked down at his daughter. She sang when she needed bread. Ruthie went still. The river song, she whispered. Yes. I can't hear it. Elias brushed hair from her damp cheek. His own hand was trembling. I can't hear it clear either, little bird. That confession filled the room with a different kind of quiet. Ruthie stared at him. You forgot. Some of it, he said. Not because I stopped loving her, because time is hard on voices. Caleb looked at the floor. Nora took a breath. Then maybe tomorrow we write down everything each of you remembers. Not just the song, everything. Yellow flowers, peppermints, the blue jar, the way she tied ribbons, the things that made her marry Boone. Elias looked at her, and in his eyes she saw surprise, grief, and gratitude all tangled together. A memory book, Nora said, so no one has to carry it alone. Ruthie leaned against her father, exhausted now. Will you help? The question was soft, but it carried the weight of invitation. Nora glanced at Caleb. The boy's face tightened, as if he wanted to refuse before anyone could ask him. I will help if everyone wants me to, she said. Ruthie nodded at once. Elias nodded after a moment. Caleb said nothing. He only stood there in the doorway with his arms crossed. Then, barely loud enough to hear, he said, I remember the second verse. Ruthie's eyes widened. You do? Some. Will you sing it? No. The answer came too fast. Nora did not press him, neither did Elias. Ruthie lay back against the pillow. Her crying had worn her out. Nora tucked the quilt around her, then held the cup of water while she drank. Elias stayed beside her until her eyes closed. When Ruthie slept at last, the three of them returned to the kitchen. The fire had burned low. The letter from Mary still lay on the table beside the agency paper, one written with love, the other with threat. Nora looked at them and felt the difference like warmth and ice. Elias picked up Mary's letter and folded it with great care. I should have found this sooner, he said. You found it when the house was ready for it, Nora replied. He looked at her, and when I was. She did not answer. The truth sat too close between them. Caleb moved to the table and touched the agency paper with one finger. Is this why Miss Nora might leave? She is not leaving tonight, Elias said. That isn't what I asked. Nora felt the boy's eyes on her. She sat down across from him. I do not want to leave. Caleb's face shifted, but he guarded it quickly. Wanting doesn't keep people. No, she said, it doesn't. Then what does? Nora thought of contracts, coins, train platforms, closed doors, and the strange mercy of a man crossing a dusty street. Choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, she said. Caleb stared at her for a long time. Then he picked up the paper, carried it to the stove, and held it near the flame. Elias stood quickly. Caleb. The boy froze. That paper may be ugly, Elias said, but we may need it. Caleb's hand shook. I hate it. So do I. It says she owes him. No, Elias said, his voice deepened. It says he wants her to believe she does. Nora watched Caleb lower the paper slowly. Outside, wind pressed against the cabin walls. Inside, the fire gave one soft crack, sending sparks up the chimney. Elias turned to Nora. At first light, I'm riding to Mercy Creek. Pastor Whitlow will know what standing this has. If Price wants to dress cruelty up as law, we'll answer with truth. I am going with you, Nora said. No. Yes. Elias held her gaze. This time he did not argue long. All right, he said. Caleb set the paper back on the table. I'm going too. You're staying with Ruthie. But I heard what happened at the depot. Folks need to hear it from someone who saw what happened after. You didn't see the depot, Elias said. Caleb lifted his chin. No, but I saw what came after. The words settled over them. For the first time since Nora had come to Wolf Pine Ridge, Caleb was not trying to keep her outside the family's trouble. He was stepping into it beside her. Morning came with a hard frost, silvering the grass around the cabin. Nora had slept little. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mr. Price's paper on the porch rail, Amos Pike's face at the depot, Ruthie crying in the dark because her mother's voice had slipped beyond reach. Now she stood at the stove, wrapping biscuits in a cloth for the ride to Mercy Creek. Her hands worked steady, though her heart did not. Across the room, Elias buckled his coat. Caleb sat at the table with his jaw set, watching every move as if he feared being left behind by surprise. Ruthie was still asleep. That was the only reason Caleb had not argued more. You'll keep the fire low, Elias told him. Not high, low and steady. I know. If Ruthie coughs hard, give her the syrup. I know. And if anyone comes while we're gone, I don't open the door unless I hear your voice. Elias nodded, but his eyes lingered on his son. You're doing a man's work today. Caleb's face changed at that. Pride rose in him, but so did fear. I'd rather go with you, he said. I know. Nora crossed the room and placed the wrapped biscuits on the table. We need someone here who loves Ruthie enough to stay. Caleb looked up at her. The words reached him differently than an order would have. He did not soften exactly, but his anger lost its sharpest edge. I'll watch her, he said. Nora nodded. I know you will. Ruthie woke before they left and came to the door wrapped in Mary's old blue shawl. Nora stopped when she saw it. Caleb must have taken it from the rocking chair before dawn. The shawl was still dusty in places, but it lay around Ruthie's thin shoulders like a blessing and a wound at the same time. Elias saw it too, his breath caught. Ruthie looked from one adult to the other. Caleb said Mama would want me warm. No one spoke for a moment. Then Elias knelt and pulled the shawl tighter around her. He was right. Ruthie turned to Nora. Will the paper man make you leave? No, Nora said. It was the first time she said it, without fear hiding under the word. Ruthie studied her face, then reached into the pocket of the shawl and pulled out a small yellow ribbon, faded with age. This was Mama's. Take it so you remember to come back. Nora could have refused. She could have said it was too precious. But Ruthie was not giving away memory. She was lending courage. Nora took the ribbon and tied it around her wrist. I'll bring it home, she said. The ride down the mountain was cold and quiet. Elias drove with both hands on the reins. Nora sat beside him, the yellow ribbon bright against her dark sleeve. The agency paper rested folded inside Elias' coat, but Mary's letter was in Nora's pocket. Elias had asked her to carry it. He had not explained why. He did not need to. The town of Mercy Creek looked sharper in morning light than it had on the day Nora arrived. The same depot stood near the tracks. The same mercantile windows watched the street. The same church steeple rose above everything, pale against the sky. But Nora was not the same woman who had stood there with a cracked bag and nowhere to go. She stepped down from the wagon before Elias could help her. Pastor Whitlow met them outside the church. He was an older man with kind eyes and a back bent slightly from years of leaning over sickbeds, graves, and wedding books. He greeted Elias first, then Nora. "I heard some of it," he said. "I expect not all." "No," Nora answered, "not all." Inside the church office, Elias laid the agency paper on the desk. Pastor Whitlow put on his spectacles and read it slowly. His mouth tightened once, then again. "This is not a marriage contract," he said at last. "It is a payment agreement dressed up in threatening words." "Can they force her back?" Elias asked. "No." The pastor removed his spectacles. "No court in this county would order a woman to marry a man who rejected her. They may try to claim money, but even that is doubtful if Mr. Pike broke the arrangement publicly." Nora's knees weakened so fast she gripped the back of a chair. Elias saw it and moved nearer, but did not touch her. He had learned something about her pride. Support was not always a hand. Sometimes it was simply standing close enough to catch without making a show of it. Pastor Whitlow looked at her gently. "Did anyone witness Mr. Pike refusing you?" Nora almost laughed. "Half the town." "Then we will need half the town to remember honestly." That was the harder part. By noon, word had spread that Elias Boone and Nora Bell were at the church. People began drifting in under one excuse or another. A woman came to leave preserves. A rancher came to ask about Sunday repairs. 2 boys came because they had been sent away from the mercantile for listening too closely. Then Amos Pike arrived with Mr. Price. Amos looked less certain than he had at the depot, but pride kept his chin high. Mr. Price carried a leather case and wore the calm expression of a man used to frightening poor people with paper. "This is unnecessary," Price said. Pastor Whitlow stood behind his desk. Truth often feels unnecessary to those who benefit from silence. Elias' eyes moved to Nora. She stood beside the window, sunlight falling across her plain dress, Ruthie's yellow ribbon tied at her wrist. Amos saw the ribbon and frowned, as if even that small sign of belonging offended him. "She owes me," Amos said. "I paid for a bride." The room went still. Nora turned toward him. "No," she said. "You paid an agency because you were lonely. I answered because I was lonely too, but loneliness does not give a man ownership over a woman." A murmur passed through the doorway where several townspeople had gathered. Amos flushed. "You make it sound ugly." "It was ugly when you left me standing at the depot." He looked away first. That mattered, people saw it. Mr. Price opened his case. "Emotion aside, there are costs." Pastor Whitlow lifted Mary's letter from the desk. Nora had given it to him only moments before. "Before we speak of cost, I think this town should remember value." Nora's heart jumped. She had not expected him to read it aloud. He did not read all of it, only the part Mary had left like a lantern for the living. "Kindness may come to our door in a shape we did not expect. Do not turn it away because grief has made you afraid." The room changed. Elias bowed his head. Nora stared at the floorboards. Outside the office, someone sniffed softly. "If this moment makes you believe that truth can be stronger than gossip, let your heart stay with Nora, because the town has not heard the final truth yet." A woman stepped forward from the doorway. It was Mrs. Harlan, the same woman who had carried eggs past Nora at the depot and said nothing. "I saw it," she said quietly. Amos turned. "Saw what?" "You refusing her, loud, cruel, like you wanted us all to know she wasn't good enough for you." Her voice shook, but she kept speaking. "I should have helped her, I didn't. That shame is mine, but I won't lie now." Another voice came from behind her. "I saw it too." Then another. The porter, one cowhand, the blacksmith's wife. Piece by piece, the silence that had hurt Nora began to break. Mr. Price closed his leather case. Amos stood alone in the middle of the room, surrounded not by enemies but by witnesses. That seemed worse for him. Elias stepped beside Nora. "You have your answer." Amos looked at her then. For the first time he seemed to see not a rejected bride, not a debt, not an embarrassment, but a woman who had survived him. His voice came low, "Keep her then." Elias' answer was quiet. "She was never yours to give." For a moment after Elias spoke, no one in Pastor Whitlow's office moved. Amos Pike stood with his hat crushed in both hands, his face marked by anger he could not spend. Mr. Price's polished calm had begun to crack. The townspeople crowded near the doorway no longer looked curious. They looked ashamed, and shame had a way of making honest people stand straighter. Nora did not feel victory. She had thought the truth would bring relief, but the truth brought something heavier. It brought memory. She could still feel the depot boards beneath her shoes, still hear Amos saying she was not suited to his home, still see the town turning away because her pain had been easier to ignore than answer. Mrs. Harlan stepped closer, twisting her apron in both hands. "Miss Bell," she said, voice trembling, "I owe you an apology." Nora looked at her. The woman swallowed. "I saw you standing there. I knew you had nowhere to go. I told myself it was not my affair." Nora's throat tightened. Most people did. "That does not make it right." "No," Nora said, "it does not." Mrs. Harlan lowered her eyes. "If you ever need work in town, I have curtains that need mending, and 2 shirts I pay fair." It was a small offer, but small offers had saved Nora before. "Thank you," she said. The porter cleared his throat from the doorway. "I can say what I saw too, Pastor, if the sheriff needs it written." "So can I," said the blacksmith's wife. "And me," added one of the cowhands, red-faced and looking at the floor. Pastor Whitlow nodded. "Good. Then Mr. Price will have all the witness he needs to understand this matter is finished." Mr. Price stiffened. "The agency will not be pleased." "The agency may write to me," the pastor said, "or to Sheriff Bellamy. I am sure both of us will enjoy reading how a respectable business tried to frighten a woman into returning to a man who publicly rejected her." That ended it. Mr. Price gathered his papers with stiff fingers. Amos still had not moved. His eyes went to Nora once more, and there was something like resentment in them, but beneath it lay fear. Not fear of Elias, not even fear of the law, fear that people had seen him clearly. "I only wanted a wife," Amos muttered. Nora looked at him with more sadness than anger. "No," she said. "You wanted a woman who would make you feel less lonely without asking you to become kinder." The words struck him silent. Elias did not smile. He did not boast. He simply opened the church office door wider, and Amos walked out with Mr. Price behind him. The room breathed again. Nora stood very still, afraid that if she moved too quickly, all the strength would leave her legs. Elias seemed to sense it. He stepped near enough that his sleeve brushed hers. "You ready to go home?" he asked. "Home?" The word moved through her like warmth from a banked fire. She looked at him careful. "Is that what it is?" Elias held her gaze. "It is if you want it to be." The answer was plain, but it was not small. Nora looked down at the yellow ribbon tied around her wrist. Ruthie had given it to her so she would come back. Caleb had stayed behind to guard the cabin. Mary's letter rested in Pastor Whitlow's desk now, copied and witnessed, its words no longer hidden in a sewing basket. "I want it," Nora said. Elias' face changed. Only a little, but she saw it. The guarded man from the feed store was still there, still carrying grief in his bones, but something in him had begun to lift. They left Mercy Creek in the early afternoon. The town watched again, but this time the watching felt different. Mrs. Harlan stood outside the mercantile and raised one hand. The blacksmith gave a nod. The porter touched his cap. None of it erased the day at the depot, but maybe some wrongs could not be erased. Maybe they could only be answered, one brave act at a time. The wagon climbed toward Wolf Pine Ridge, with the sun slipping west. For a long while, neither Nora nor Elias spoke. The road was rough, and the mare moved slowly. Pine shadows stretched across the trail. Nora held Ruthie's ribbon between her fingers and thought of the little girl waiting at the cabin. At last Elias said, "I was afraid today." Nora turned to him. He kept his eyes on the road. "Not of Amos, not of Price. I was afraid you would decide the trouble was too much and leave anyway." "I thought about it." His hands tightened on the reins. Nora did not soften the truth. He deserved honesty more than comfort. "Not because I wanted to go, because I know what it feels like to become a burden people later regret carrying." Elias stopped the wagon. The sudden stillness filled the forest around them. The mare blew softly. A crow called somewhere high in the trees. Elias turned toward her. "You are not a burden." "You say that now." "I say it knowing the work, the gossip, the children, the winter, and the debt that almost was." Nora looked away, but he continued. "You came into my house with one bag and more courage than anyone should have to carry. You fed my children. You helped Ruthie remember her mother without making Mary smaller. You stood beside me when it would have been easier to stand alone." His voice grew rough. "I do not know how to speak pretty, Nora. I know wood, nails, weather, and when a thing is true. This is true. I do not want you at my table because I need help. I want you there because the house feels wrong when I imagine you gone." Nora's eyes filled before she could stop them. "Elias," she whispered. He reached into his coat pocket, then stopped himself, as if the gesture frightened him. When his hand came out, he held no ring, only a small carved button made from pale wood. "I made this for Mary once," he said, "for a coat she never finished. I found it in the barn last winter and could not throw it away." He placed it in Nora's palm. "I am not asking you to be Mary. I am not asking you to mend what cannot be mended. I am asking if, when the time is right, you might let me build something new beside what was lost." Nora closed her fingers around the button. A careful answer would have been safer, but love did not always arrive after safety. Sometimes it came while fear still stood in the room. "Yes," she said. Elias bowed his head, and for one quiet moment in the mountain road, grief and hope sat together without fighting. They reached the cabin just as dusk fell. Caleb came out first, running hard across the yard. The look on his face wiped every tender thought from Nora's mind. "What is it?" Elias called. Caleb's voice broke. "It's Ruthie. Her cough got bad after noon. I gave the syrup like you said, but she's burning up. Pa, she keeps asking for Miss Nora." Nora was off the wagon before it fully stopped. Inside the cabin, Ruthie lay beneath Mary's blue shawl, cheeks bright with fever, one small hand reaching weakly toward the door. And when Nora took that hand, Ruthie opened her eyes and whispered the one word no one was ready to hear. "Mama." The word filled the cabin and left every heart inside it trembling. "Mama." Nora knelt beside Ruthie's bed and held the child's burning hand between both of hers. She did not correct her. She did not look toward Elias for permission. She only leaned close, brushed damp hair from Ruthie's forehead, and spoke in the calmest voice she had. "I'm here, little bird." Elias stood behind her, white with fear. Caleb hovered near the foot of the bed, fists clenched, his face trying to be brave and failing. "She got worse fast," Caleb said. "I did what you told me. I kept the fire low. I gave the syrup. I cooled her face. I tried." Elias crossed the room and pulled his son close with one arm. "You did right." Caleb's shoulders shook once. "I was scared." "So was I," Elias said. Nora looked up. "I need cool water, clean cloths, and willow bark if there is any left." "There is some," Elias said. "Then bring it." No one argued, no one froze. This time the house moved as one. Elias fetched water from the barrel. Caleb tore clean strips from an old sheet. Nora laid cool cloths on Ruthie's forehead, wrists, and throat. She brewed willow bark tea bitter enough to make the child turn her face away, then coaxed one small sip at a time past her lips. "That's it," Nora whispered. "Just one more. You are stronger than this fever." Ruthie's lashes fluttered. "Don't go." "I won't." The promise came without thought, but once spoken, Nora knew it was true. Whatever the law said, whatever the town said, whatever fear still waited on the mountain road, she was done living like a woman with one foot always turned toward leaving. She was staying. The night stretched long. Wind pressed against the cabin walls. The lantern flame trembled. Mary's blue shawl lay across Ruthie's small body, and every so often Elias touched the edge of it, as if asking the woman he had lost to help guard the child they both loved. Near midnight, Ruthie began to cry in her sleep. "Song," she whispered, "Mama's song." Elias bowed his head. "I can't remember enough." Caleb wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "I know the second verse." Nora looked at him. "Then sing what you know." "I can't." "Yes," Elias said, voice breaking. "You can." Caleb stared at his sister. His mouth trembled. Then, in a thin and uneven voice, he began. The words were simple. A river, a yellow flower, a bird going home before winter. He missed a line. Elias found another. Nora did not know the tune, but she hummed softly beneath them, steadying it, holding the song together where memory cracked. Ruthie's breathing eased. Caleb kept singing. By the final verse, Elias was singing too, low, rough, and full of grief, but singing. The sound moved through the cabin like a door opening after years of being locked. It was not perfect. It was not Mary's voice, but it carried Mary's love. And somehow that was enough. Just before dawn, the fever broke. Nora felt it first beneath her palm. The terrible heat began to loosen. Ruthie's breathing grew deeper. The tight pull around her mouth softened. Nora held still, afraid to trust it too quickly. Then Ruthie opened her eyes. "Water," she whispered. Elias made a sound that was almost a sob. Caleb sat down hard on the floor and covered his face. Nora lifted the cup to Ruthie's lips, and the child drank. "You came back," Ruthie said. Nora smiled through tears. "I told you I would." Ruthie's weak fingers touched the yellow ribbon still tied around Nora's wrist. "You brought Mama's ribbon home." "Yes." "Can you keep it?" Nora looked at Elias. His eyes were wet but steady. "I think Mary would like that." Later, when Ruthie slept peacefully and the first morning light touched the window, Elias stepped to Mary's rocking chair. For a long moment, he stood before it. Then he lifted the blue shawl's empty corner from the arm and shook the dust from it gently. Caleb watched from the table. Elias turned to him. "Your mama is not in this chair, son." Caleb's eyes filled. "She is in the song, in Ruthie's ribbon, in the way you stood guard last night, in every good thing she left in us." The boy nodded once, but tears slipped down his face anyway. Nora brought Mary's sewing basket to the table. She placed the wooden button Elias had given her beside the yellow ribbon. Then she opened the first page of the memory book they had begun, and in careful writing, she added the song as Caleb and Elias remembered it. When Ruthie woke again, Elias carried her to the rocking chair and sat with her in his lap. For the first time since Nora had entered that cabin, the chair did not look like a grave. It looked like a place where love had once rested, and where love could rest again. 2 days later, Pastor Whitlow rode up the ridge with Sheriff Bellamy and Mrs. Harlan. The sheriff brought word that Mr. Price had left the county that morning. Amos Pike had withdrawn his claim after half the town signed witness statements. Mrs. Harlan brought work for Nora, but she also brought a basket of bread, apples, and peppermint sticks in a blue jar. "For the little girl," she said softly. Ruthie smiled from beneath her quilt. Amos never came to Wolf Pine Ridge. He never apologized either, but Nora stopped needing one. Some justice arrived in courtrooms. Some arrived when a cruel man lost the power to frighten you. Weeks passed. Winter settled over the mountain, but the cabin stayed warm. Caleb laughed more often, though he still tried to hide it. Ruthie's cough faded little by little. Elias began leaving coffee for Nora each morning, and Nora began mending his coat without pretending it was only work. On Christmas Eve, beneath a sky full of stars, Elias asked Nora to marry him. He did not use Mary's ring. Instead, he gave her a plain band he had traded 3 chairs and a carved cradle to buy. His hands shook when he held it out. "I loved Mary," he said. "I always will, but my heart has room for truth, and the truth is this: I love you, Nora Bell." Nora looked at Caleb and Ruthie standing by the porch, both trying not to smile too soon. Then she looked back at Elias. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay." Ruthie ran into her arms. Caleb leaned against Elias, pretending he had only stepped closer because the snow was deep. If this story reminded you that broken hearts can still become a family, hold that feeling close and share it with someone who needs hope. That night, smoke rose from the chimney of the cabin on Wolf Pine Ridge. Inside, Mary's song was written in the memory book, Nora's ribbon lay safe in the sewing basket, and 4 chairs sat around the table. None of them were empty anymore.